Right, hi guys, Luton here, and I'm going to talk very briefly, unscripted, about Eternal Crusade, Warhammer 40,000 Eternal Crusade. So you guys know that pretty much since the beginning of the game, I've been following this one. The devs have been kind to me, they've given me some codes to give out, I've had a pretty good relationship ongoing with them. So today I want to give some critical feedback. I have given some thoughts previously about ways in which they could improve the game, but I just banged out a good, I don't know, maybe 3-hour session on the game this morning. Played a lot of different classes, played a lot of different roles, played in armor, medic, assault, heavy, tactical, pretty much played through every class and most variations of weapon. So how does the game feel currently? How are they doing? What needs to be updated? Quite a lot needs updating. For one thing, the spawns are currently fairly nightmarish, especially when an enemy has captured a point. There are, on multiple maps, there are some quite odd things that happen when you spawn on bases, and one of those specifically is you very often, the spawns are not very well spread around. You know, you tend to have kind of one spawn or two spawns, and that is a big problem because very often you will spawn into line of sight of your enemy, which is obviously a really terrible thing. So whilst I might have sometimes survived, I would often take fire coming in, or more often than not, you maybe get assault marines coming down on you, or you're pushing forward. Basically, you know, you're in people's line of sight, and you know, guys start to know quickly where those spawns are as well because there's so few of them. So if they see a couple of people running from one direction, they're like, oh, that's where the spawn is, and you start having people congregate around you. Now that would be bad enough, except for the fact that there's then a respawn delay, so you have a death timer. Now I'm actually a fan of respawn delay death timers because generally it means it makes you value your life more, except for the fact that Eternal Crusade is designed to be kind of hack/kamikaze-ish. You know, you can be tactical, you can be sort of considered in your approaching of enemies and where you're shooting towards, but more often than not, it's like, rah, must get to the objective, you know, and if you're playing that kind of way, you don't really want to be sitting there being like, you know, because it kind of interrupts the flow and it can be really problematic. And then compound that with the fact that when you respawn back in, you may get picked off or line of sighted, and it's just quite irritating. And then compound that with the fact that very often from where you spawn to where you actually have to go to the objective, even if you're spawning actually like on the objective, it's usually like, I don't know, like a 30-second run to where you've got to get to. It makes it incredibly difficult to reinforce positions and actually get in onto those bases and create kind of like hectic firefights. It means that more often than not, what you get is dribbles of people coming back in, you know, 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, and if you have like 7 or 8 guys actually in a base, they're going to very easily just destroy you because people come in 1s and 2s. Now you're going to say, well, obviously what you could do there is wait, get your guys together and go in as a group. Let's do that, except that we need the group mechanic in place in the game in order to do that, like I said on the last video. So until they have the join as a squad mechanic, you're not really going to be able to do that joining as a squad. Another thing, you can use rhinos, the transport vehicle. It's kind of like an APC. You can use the rhino to spawn on, except you seem to only be able to spawn on your own squad rhino, not any rhino. So again, once one is in place, I've sometimes seen them dotted around the map, yet I can't spawn on them. And I'm like, well, that's really annoying, because sometimes someone will have taken an initiative in bringing a rhino up to, say, a point, let's say D point or something, right? And I want to spawn that rhino because we have to defend it or attack it or whatever, you know? Yet I can't spawn on it, so I now have to spawn on my base, or C or B, and then take like a 60-second run to get there. And by which time maybe we've lost completely the initiative of what we had. So there's a lot of timing and spawn stuff which really interrupts and disrupts not only the flow, but the amount of action that you're seeing. And then this leads me on to another thing that I said last time, which was really brought home to me today, was yet again the time to kill. The time to kill is a really curious one. It seems, I think, I don't know whether it's just to weapon balance. I think it's to weapon balance, but I think it's also to do with the actual combat mechanics, in what, especially melee. Melee still feels like it has a work to do. One of the issues with melee, let me just talk about that first. One of the issues with melee is that when you're fighting in melee, they have got a block, a kind of like bash mechanic where you can kind of protect yourself, and that's fine. But the thing is, every melee action, other than maybe the chainsword slashing, where you can kind of be like buzz, buzz, and you can kind of do a few in succession, all of the melee mechanics seem to have a pause after every thrust, and that leaves you incredibly open. So again, it kind of, if you want to be in fiction about it, and I think it's not always good to be in fiction about games, because games often require mechanics outside of fiction in order to make them work and be enjoyable, right? But actually I think it's the other way around with this. I think that, you know, the in-fictionness of the game should actually apply to the melee. Space Marines, for example, yes, they wear big suits of armor, but these are nuclear-powered suits of armor, which are supposed to be, you know, the ultimate warriors in the universe. So I don't think after every thrust or swing, they would be like, huh, and now I've got to turn, and then like, you know, they would be a bit more like bash, bash, defend, get in, bang, bang, you know, a lot more like that. And it doesn't feel like that. It feels very much like this paused, kind of almost sometimes slow motion fighting. Now, again, that's not just an aesthetic. It's not just a kind of a preferential thing. It's actually it actually affects the way in which you fight, specifically in that because there's that small delay. The way in which you turn and move towards enemies is kind of a little clunky. Like, you turn the camera around, it's not perfect. So sometimes you'll swing and the guy will move a little bit or whatever, and because you can't immediately counteract that, because you've swung, you're now in the bad position, you're now in the disadvantage, and the other guy's like, oh, he's swung already, bang, and you're down. And it's like, fucking hell, like, that can be really frustrating. Sometimes as well, when you're actually sort of trying to initiate that combat, or you're trying to chase a guy down, they can just kind of run away from you around objects or whatever. And because, as I say, it's all to do with that timing, so you maybe come down and you swing and you miss, and then because you had that small delay, it gives them enough of a distance in terms of running to get away from you that maybe then you can't reach them on your next swing, or there's no kind of intercept ability to kind of jump and speed up a little bit. There's no, the sprint is not, you know, it's kind of like a jog. It doesn't really sort of give you a speed boost. You know, I would rather see everyone have a little, maybe, I think what could work is maybe everybody has like a small sort of speed increase of their general running, like a very small, like 10-15% or something like that. But then the speed itself, the actual sprint, okay, if you sprint rather than giving like just generally a little bit faster running, what it does is it gives you a proper sprint, like, so it enables you to get into combat, cover distance more quickly. But maybe, as I say, you have that kind of stamina there, so you tire quickly from that, although arguably a Space Marine probably wouldn't tire at all. The tanks and vehicles generally feel a lot improved off of what they were. It's smaller things, you know, those are visual things as well, like with the rhinos. It looked at one point like one of his tracks was going to come off. It was glitching out a little bit. They sometimes feel a little bit more like they're like click, click, click when they're sort of turning and doing things, you know. They still got that clunkiness, and they still just need refining, smoothing out. The weapons and shooting, I actually feel like, having played through today, the weapons and shooting was probably the least of the issues. I think really today, melee was the thing that I noticed the most, which was causing me the biggest amount of problems. But when it comes to shooting, in general, I still feel like there's quite a disparity between some of the weapons. So like a plasma gun, when you're firing it, seems to feel like it's just not connecting as much as, say, a bolter sometimes, because the bolter you can kind of free fire. The plasma gun, it kind of can be a little bit sort of hit and miss, literally, when you're shooting at people. But the one good thing with the plasma gun is that it does have its like charge up ability, and that can be quite powerful. When you're charging that thing up and you land it on someone, that is quite powerful, and obviously like the bolter doesn't have. There's always going to be like quite a balancing issue when it comes to these kind of things, because when you have kind of sci-fi weapons and so on, it's quite tricky to sort of balance that and figure like, okay, how are the, you know, weapons going to function versus one another, especially when you have things like heavies in the mix, and you have a real, like, I guess the one positive thing that you could say definitely is that they all have unique characteristics, unlike other games, which, you know, sometimes the weapons, although there may be many of them, feel very, very similar and don't really give you a great benefit. In this game, definitely the weapons, you choose a weapon for a specific role. If you're going to be in close quarters a lot, you're going to probably take a melter. If you're going to be in close quarters a lot and you're maybe going to see a lot of enemies there and you want to suppress them, and you want to deal a lot of kind of just weight of firepower, you might take something like the Storm Bolter for your Marine. If you're just being tactical in general, you're going to take the Bolter. That's for your standard guys. Then it comes to the heavies, okay? If you're going for the heavies, if you want to snipe, which is it's not the easiest thing at all to do and often quite inefficient. If you want to snipe, you can take like the las cannon. That's very good against vehicles. The heavy plasma is good for locking down when you've got like specific targets that you're going to fire in onto. So if you're locking down like a position you want to defend, the heavy plasma, if you're in a good position, you can fire down with that. The heavy bolter in sort of close quarter, high traffic areas, again, can be very powerful. All of the heavies, of course, they have the downside to them that they're quite slow and they make you less maneuverable, unlike the sort of more tactical stuff. So all of the weapons going on there, it feels like they're really good. On one of their recent infographics, they stated that the game is going to have thousands of weapons. I'm not sure whether they mean thousands of weapon customizations or thousands of skins, but when I think of like 1,000, that's a lot. 1,000 is a lot of weapons. So if there's literally 1,000 weapons, I'm a little curious as to how that's going to come into the game. I'm quite unsure about that statement. 1,000 weapons. Again, I'm not sure whether that's skins or just modifications or whatever, but that's a lot. That's a big claim to make, so I would kind of like a little bit of elaboration on that, where they're coming from with that one. But as I say, in general, it's this close quarter sort of balance right now, and this is going to be the real core of making this game work, is the close quarter and the ranged balance. Now, I've sort of spoken now about the melee and the ranged, now thinking about them together, and this is where the game really, it's hard to know how to balance that accurately, and I sort of spoke about it a little bit on the previous video. The reason it's so difficult to balance is you want close combat to be long enough that it feels like you're having a proper fight, but you don't want ranged guys to just drop you whilst you're having that fight, you know, instantly, unless it's, you know, a couple or whatever. I don't know. It's really, the reason it's frustrating is because sometimes you can have a really good close quarter fight with someone. You'll be banging, bang, psh, psh, smashing, fighting, and, you know, you're generally having a bit of back and forth, rolling around, tactical, you know, and then you just kill him, bam, you get killed. And you're like, oh, for Christ's sake, like, I just had that full-on fight, and then I just get instantly killed. And that happens quite a lot. What's the answer to that? I don't know. That's the problem, because that's the difficulty when you're mixing this kind of more extended close combat with powerful ranged weapons. Now again, you can't just, as I say, I felt in my previous video, I felt like if you pushed the time to kill, if you gave a little health increase, like 10%, 15%, that might make the difference between those kind of it almost feels like you're getting one shot sometimes, those kind of encounters, and actually having a slightly more prolonged engagement. Similarly, if you're actually in close combat, it means that we might get more sort of 4 or 5 people together in close combat surviving, rather than just, you know, one axe hit and you're down or something. So I don't know. And again, you can't just nerf all the ranged weapons for obvious reasons, because then when people are having ranged engagements, nobody's just going to kill anybody, so that would be stupid. So you can't do that either. But, I mean, 40k, it really relies on having that mix of range and close quarter. That's what the crux of the game is all about. And so it's a difficult thing. You know, it really is. It's a difficult thing. But they do need to resolve it, because, as I say, quite often it feels really frustrating, you know. And it goes both ways. Sometimes you know, you have like a good couple of shooting situations, you know, you might clear a couple of guys out, and then some guy just lands next to you and goes bang, and you're down melee, and you're like, oh, you know, like, it feels very much that you should have the opportunity to take one hit and then be like, do like a back roll or something and be ready to defend yourself. Instead, it very often happens that you just get one kill, you know, you just like, bam, you're down. And that happens a lot. There's a lot of that kind of one hitting and you know, taking fire, and you're just down, you're down, you're down. Now, as I say, in some respects, depending on what weapon you're being engaged by and so on, that actually makes complete sense. But then, as I said at the beginning of this video, you compound that with the respawn delay, the fact that you have to run back into combat. Now, if the respawn delay was a lot shorter, or there was a respawn delay but it spawned you more back into the action, you would be able to get back in the action quicker, and so maybe those one hit kills, those instant deaths wouldn't feel so bad, because you're like, oh, I'm down, but let's get back in the fight, yeah, you know. But it doesn't feel like that. It's like you get killed and you're like, ugh, and then you have to respawn, and then you have to run back, and then it's like, oh, and then it's happened again, and then you got to respawn, and then you got to run back. So there's a lot of interruption in terms of the actual gameplay right now. There's a lot happening which takes you away from that action, and the action when you're having it is furious, so it's good, but there's a lot of refinement needs going on here, and until some of those things get fixed, I'm finding it difficult to kind of really play and get a lot out of the game right now, because as the game progresses and people sort of understand, this is what always happens, as a game progresses, people sort of start to understand the mechanics better, people get more synced up with those kills and so on. It means that they're getting more instantaneous kills and moments, and you know, I was as well, I was running around, I was like, bang, one guy down, one guy down, one guy down, and you're sort of getting like that. But again, it interrupts that flow more for everybody, so those balances become even more important as the game goes along. As always, guys, tell me your thoughts down below about Eternal Crusade. I hope that they look into the balances and the mechanics and some of these elements which interrupt the gameplay flow, slow you down. As I say, I'm not fully against like respawn death timers. It's good because it gives you some tactics there in terms of, you take down your enemy, it gives you an opportunity to actually attack and get into a position. There's nothing worse than just having a base which is like constantly, endlessly being reinforced by respawning enemies. That sucks because you can never make any headway, right? Especially if they're just dying 1-to-1 all the time. But at the same time, you can't just have a situation where it takes so long to get back into combat that it really takes you out of the game. And they need to kind of choose either better respawns, have multiple respawns around a position and closer to each base, or they need to take away that respawn timer but make you have to run back. One or the other, but you can't have both. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time.
Defend this location, brothers!